50. Sent spaceship purchase on the galactic internet. Testing it now. Jack sat in his small room, his fingers dancing over the holographic keyboard. Outside, the night sky glimmered with distant stars, stretching endlessly across the quiet city. The hum of drones delivering packages echoed faintly in the background, but inside Jax's room, it was just him, a cheap cup of synth coffee, and the endless expanse of the galactic internet. Scrolling past countless high-tech advertisements, Jax yawned. Ships worth millions flashed across the screen, sleek, polished, and untouchable for someone like him, a mere tinkerer with a tight budget. Every ship was out of his reach. Every ship, that is, except for one. It was small. Ridiculously small. Almost laughable. Spaceship tested once, only 50 cents. Jack stared at it. He blinked. He double-checked the price. Yes. 50 cents. Not 50 credits, not 50,000, not a typo. 50 cents. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. There was no way it was real. The galactic internet was full of scams. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe someone forgot a zero. Maybe it was a trap, yet something tugged at him. Curiosity, stubbornness, and that human trait he had always admired in himself. Hope against the odds. Why not? He muttered aloud. 50 cents, I'll never know unless I try. Jax clicked the buy button. His heart raced. Immediately, a confirmation popped up, shipping details, delivery time, and a tracking number. The pod would arrive in 30 minutes via a standard drone drop. 30 minutes. That was nothing. He paced around his room, unable to sit still. His mind was full of questions. What kind of spaceship could cost only 50 cents? Could it even fly? Could it survive in orbit? Could he survive in it? The doorbell rang. Jax froze. Already? That was fast. He rushed to the door and saw the small drone hovering just outside, a thin metallic arm holding a tiny pod. It looked almost like a toy, barely a meter long, rounded and shiny, with a single tinted viewport. He bent down, lifted it carefully, and felt the light weight in his hands. Neighbors walking by outside laughed at the sight. "What is that?" one called. "A toy rocket for your cat?" Jax ignored them. He carried the pod to his backyard, placing it on the cracked concrete carefully. He circled it, running his hands over the smooth metal surface. Small scratches hinted that it had been tested before, but it looked intact. Somehow it seemed capable. He pressed a small button near the hatch. The pod hummed softly. Lights blinked on the control panel inside. Tiny symbols and graphs danced across the viewport. Jack stepped back, eyes wide. It was alive. Not in the way a human or animal was alive, but in the way a well-programmed machine responded to its environment. It seemed to think, or at least adapt. He climbed in carefully. The cockpit was snug, just enough room for one person. A simple seat, a steering module, and a few holographic screens. Not fancy. Not shiny. Not intimidating. Perfect. Jax tapped a command on the main panel. The pod system's word. A small hologram appeared, showing the nearby star system. Wormholes, satellites, and navigation points blinked in green and blue. He frowned. He had not inputted any coordinates. How did it know? The pod screen pulsed, as if acknowledging him. A small text appeared. Ready for testing. Proceed? Jax grinned. He tapped yes. Immediately, the pod lifted off the ground, hovering steadily. Not fast, not aggressive, but precise. Its movements were smooth, responsive, almost like it understood him. Neighbors outside gasped and stared.
That actually flies?
One whispered. Jax ignored them again. He had bigger things to worry about. He checked the control panel. Fuel levels were low, but more than enough for a short flight. He engaged a small thruster. The pod rose higher, aligning itself perfectly with the backyard fence. "Okay," Jax muttered. "Let's see what you can do." He maneuvered the pod carefully, avoiding trees, fences, and rooftops. It responded instantly, twisting and turning with a grace that surprised him. "Not a single system warning! Not a single error!" Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt strange. Jax was lost in experimentation. He tried hovering in place, spinning the pod in slow circles, testing thrusters, adjusting power. Every system was flawless. Then, just as he was starting to relax, the pod's lights flashed. A new hologram appeared. This time it was a detailed map of the entire local star system. Nearby satellites, asteroid fields, abandoned space stations, all lit up in soft green. "How?" Jax whispered. He tapped a few commands experimentally. The pod began scanning wormholes and predicting safe trajectories. Even more astonishing, it suggested shortcuts, routes no standard navigation software would ever recommend. Jax's heart raced. This cheap little pod was smarter than he expected. Smarter than most ships he had seen advertised online. He leaned back in the pilot's seat, eyes shining. For the first time in his life, he felt the thrill he had only read about in books. Not because of money, not because of status, but because of discovery. Somewhere in the galactic internet, someone, or something, had underestimated humans again. And as usual, humans had a habit of making the impossible work. Outside, the neighbors continued their chatter, oblivious. "It's just a cheap toy," someone said. "You can't fly that anywhere serious." Jax smiled. "Let them talk." They didn't understand. They never did. He activated a small communications module. It pinged the galactic internet, searching for responses. Nothing unusual, just standard channels. But then a notification popped up in an encrypted message. "If you know what you have, meet us near the Nebula Market." Jax froze. His pulse quickened. The pod had already shown him its capabilities. But now, something else was happening. Something bigger. He stared at the message, then at the pod. The tiny spaceship, purchased for a mere 50 cents, hummed softly, as if eager to prove itself. Jax laughed quietly to himself. "Well, I guess we're going on an adventure." The stars above twinkled silently. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was watching, and it would not be ready for what came next. For humans like Jax, a cheap spaceship was never just a bargain. It was a challenge. A puzzle. And if history had taught the galaxy anything, it was that humans loved challenges, and humans always found a way. Jax spent the next morning in his backyard, crouched in the pilot's seat of the tiny pod. He barely slept the night before, replaying the encrypted message over and over in his mind. "If you know what you have, meet us near the Nebula Market." Who were they? And why would anyone contact a human with a 50-cent spaceship? Before answering those questions, he needed to understand what he had bought. The pod was small, almost fragile-looking, but the more Jax examined it, the more he realized it was designed differently from anything he had ever seen. The hull was made from a lightweight alloy, but it wasn't just strong, it seemed adaptable. When he pressed on the panels, they flexed slightly as if alive. Not enough to deform the shape, but enough to hint at something clever. Jax tapped a command. Screens lit up, showing energy flow patterns. They were unusual, almost organic. The ship didn't just consume energy. It adjusted, routed it to different systems depending on need. "Wait, you're thinking?" Jax whispered, half to himself. The pod didn't answer. It didn't need to. It hummed, as if encouraging him to experiment. He stood up and walked around the pod, inspecting the thrusters. They were tiny, too small for a serious flight, or so any reasonable alien would think. But Jax had learned something about humans over centuries of trials. Size doesn't matter when creativity does. He climbed back inside. His fingers flew across the controls, trying every function. To his surprise, the pod responded immediately, adjusting thrust vectors mid-motion without error. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see how far this little thing can go." He took off slowly, hovering above the backyard. The pod lifted smoothly, spinning gently in the low morning sunlight. Neighbors peeked over fences, still snickering at the tiny craft. "It's just a toy," someone shouted. "You'll crash it in 5 minutes." Jax ignored them. "He wasn't here to impress humans. He was here to test the limits. He activated the pod's sensors." A map appeared, showing satellites, derelict stations, and small asteroid clusters nearby. Jax tapped a few controls experimentally, and the pod adjusted its trajectory automatically, weaving through obstacles before he could even plan a path. "Whoa," he muttered. "You're smarter than I thought." He grinned and pushed the thrusters harder. The pod zipped past the garden fences, floated over nearby rooftops, and shot upward toward the lower atmosphere. The neighbors gasped. Their laughter turned to astonishment. "You're insane!" someone shouted, but even they couldn't look away. Once in orbit, Jax's heart pounded. The city below looked tiny, insignificant compared to the vast darkness of space. The pod adjusted instantly, maintaining perfect orbit. He tapped the autopilot to follow a nearby wormhole. Just for fun, and the pod complied, displaying a safe path through the unpredictable currents. "This is insane," he whispered. "This thing isn't cheap, it's brilliant." He spent hours exploring. The pod was capable of morphing its shape slightly, adjusting its wings and thrusters depending on speed and direction. It could tap into abandoned satellites for extra power or navigation assistance. Its AI, or whatever it was, seemed to anticipate problems before they happened, rerouting energy, recalculating positions, and even suggesting shortcuts through dense asteroid fields. For the first time, Jax understood something important. This was no ordinary spaceship. The galactic internet had labeled it cheap and worthless, but it was clever, versatile, and adaptive. Anyone who underestimated it, or him, would pay a price. Meanwhile, alien chatter on interstellar forums reached Jax's pod sensors. He had connected it to the galactic internet to track news, not expecting much. But what he saw made him chuckle. "Humans bought another toy ship?" one alien commented, their words dripping with amusement. "It's pathetic. They will never survive in serious space travel." Another scoffed. "Imagine relying on their primitive instincts." "They are a joke." Jax tapped a small communication channel back to himself, ignoring the insults. Let them talk. The aliens were too busy looking down on humanity to see what was coming. He continued testing. He tried weaving through a nearby asteroid field. The pod responded flawlessly, twisting and spinning around massive rocks with precision that no alien autopilot could match. Every movement was exact, calculated, and smooth. Afterward, he recorded a short video of the pod's maneuver and uploaded it to the galactic internet, disguising it as a generic test. Within minutes, alien engineers began commenting in disbelief. Some claimed the footage was fake. Others argued about how it could even be possible for a human to operate a ship like that so well. Jax leaned back in his seat, satisfied. He wasn't here to prove aliens wrong yet, but human ingenuity was already speaking for itself. Then came the encrypted message again. Meet us near the Nebula Market. We want to see your ship in action. Jax stared at the words. The Nebula Market was famous across the galaxy, a hub for alien traders, engineers, and pilots. Dangerous, crowded, and full of species who assumed humans were weak, primitive, and incapable of serious innovation. He hesitated. Who'd he go? A human with a 50-cent spaceship in such a place, it could be a disaster. But another human trait kicked in. Curiosity, bravery, sometimes called foolishness, and stubbornness. Of course I'm going, he said aloud. We're going to see what they think of humans now. He spent the rest of the day preparing. He cleaned the pod, checked all systems, and ran simulations through the galactic internet. Every feature worked perfectly. The adaptive AI, the morphing wings, the energy rerouting. Everything! He realized he didn't just have a cheap pod. He had a secret weapon disguised as a toy. That evening he flew out of orbit, leaving the city lights behind. The stars stretched out before him, endless and dark. The nebula market was far, but the pod moved smoothly, weaving around abandoned satellites, using minor gravitational pulls to conserve energy, and even following subtle space currents he hadn't noticed before. Hours passed. Jax was tired but exhilarated. The pod was more than he could have hoped for, more than the galaxy expected from a human. Finally, he approached the outskirts of the nebula market. Ships of all sizes floated around, docking, undocking, and weaving through traffic with ease. Alien species of every imaginable form moved in and out of the bustling stations. Colors, sounds, and signals filled the space, overwhelming his sensors. And then he noticed it. A group of sleek, expensive ships hovering near a central docking bay. Their pilots stared, and some whispered. He could feel it. Their curiosity, disbelief, and, slowly, a spark of fear. A tiny human ship, barely a meter long, was about to enter their territory. They thought it was insignificant. Jack smiled. Humans had a reputation for being clever, unpredictable, and underestimated. And his tiny pod, bought for 50 cents, was about to prove it once again. Jax hovered at the edge of the nebula market, gripping the controls of his tiny pod. Around him, alien ships of all sizes zoomed through space lanes, their polished hulls gleaming under the nebula's multicolored light. Some were enormous, designed for speed, power, and intimidation. Others were smaller, sleek, and elegant, engineered with precise calculations and the latest alien technology. And then there was his pod. Small, cheap, ridiculously underpowered, or so the aliens thought. Jax smiled beneath his headset. Let them underestimate him. That was part of the fun. Humans had a long history of doing the impossible with what seemed useless. A voice crackled through the Galactic market communication channel. Attention pilots! The Nebula Challenge begins in 15 minutes. A navigation course through the rift is now open. Only skill and strategy will allow successful completion. All competitors proceed to the starting point. Jax tapped his autopilot lightly. The pod adjusted smoothly, floating toward the starting line. Around him, alien ships converged, engines roaring and lights flashing. They shot quick glances at his pod, some even laughing. Is that a human?
One of the aliens whispered.
Its voice was thick, mechanical, and incredulous. That thing can't survive the first turn! Jax ignored them. He knew the pod was ready. He had tested its adaptive systems, morphing wings and energy routing endlessly. It wasn't just a ship! It was a partner in ingenuity! The course was laid out across the nebula rift, a chaotic stretch of space filled with turbulent energy currents, dense asteroid clusters, and unstable gravity wells. Many alien ships had sophisticated autopilots, relying on raw speed and brute force calculations to get through. But the rift wasn't predictable. It demanded creativity, quick thinking, and instinct. Jax leaned forward, studying the holographic map projected inside the pod. Tiny lights represented the obstacles ahead, swirling currents, hidden debris, and ghosted outlines of unstable gravitational zones. The signal came, ready, set, go. Immediately, alien ships shot forward. Engines flaring, twisting through the rift with practiced precision. Jax followed, tapping his controls lightly. The pod responded instantly, adjusting to every shift in currents and gravitational pull. The first cluster of asteroids loomed ahead. Alien ships tried brute force, speeding through at maximum thrust. Some dodged successfully, some collided lightly, sparks flying, but none were perfect. Jax smiled. He didn't need brute force. He had creativity. He guided the pod along a twisting path, barely moving forward, allowing the energy currents to push him around obstacles. The pod shifted shape slightly, wings flexing, thrusters adjusting. Every move was small but precise. By the time he cleared the first cluster, most alien ships were struggling to catch up. Impossible, muttered an alien pilot behind him. Its ship spun slightly, recalculating. How can a human compete with these machines? Jax grinned. That was exactly the reaction he wanted. The next section of the rift was more dangerous, an unstable gravity well that pulled ships towards its center. Alien pilots relied on heavy engines to fight the pull, risking overshoot or collision. Jax's pod, however, worked differently. It adapted to the pull automatically. Its morphing hull reduced resistance, and its thrusters applied minimal energy to glide safely around the well. Look at that! A nearby alien engineer gasped, watching a holographic feed from the market cameras. It's like the pod knows the rift itself. Humans were unpredictable. And this pod? It was proving that truth beyond doubt. The final stretch was the trickiest, a series of energy currents that twisted in unpredictable patterns. Most alien ships zigzagged, trying to calculate every movement. The pod's autopilots overloaded, systems flashing warnings. Panic began to spread. Jax's pod, in contrast, didn't panic. It anticipated, adapted, and guided him through the currents with perfect timing. He leaned into the motions, letting the pod lead. The currents pulled, spun, and tossed his tiny craft, but he kept control. Other ships struggled, some getting stuck or forced to abort. By the time he reached the final marker, the crowd in the Nebula Market Station went silent. His pod floated effortlessly across the finish line. First. Tiny, humble, and seemingly useless, it had outperformed every high-tech alien ship. A cheer erupted from the spectators who had been rooting for underdogs. Even some alien engineers shook their heads, muttering, How did a human do that? Jax climbed out of the pod at the docking bay, laughing quietly to himself. The pod had proven something humans had always known. Size and money mattered less than creativity, intelligence, and adaptability. A group of aliens approached him cautiously. They were the ones who had sent the encrypted message, curious to see if the hype was true. One of them, a tall being with translucent skin and glowing eyes, spoke. Human, your ship, your performance was extraordinary, it said slowly. We thought it was a joke. A cheap pod! Yet you completed the course flawlessly, Jax shrugged casually. I just listened to it. We work well together. The alien's eyes widened. You collaborate with machines differently than we do. You improvise, you adapt. That is dangerous. Dangerous? Jax laughed. We call it thinking! Behind him, the other alien pilots muttered among themselves. Some looked impressed, others nervous. The underestimation of humans had been their mistake. A species that could turn a 50-cent pod into the fastest ship through the nebula rift was not a species to ignore. Jax returned to his pod, checking the systems. It hummed softly, as if proud. Small, cheap, and underestimated. That was exactly how humans liked it. While other species relied on numbers, credits, and brute calculations, humans thrived on ingenuity, intuition, and creativity. The alien who had spoken leaned closer. Human, tell me, what is your species' advantage? Why are you able to do what others cannot? Jax grinned. We're curious. We adapt. We don't give up. And sometimes we make miracles out of scraps.
The alien considered this.
Its species relied on planning, protocols, and hierarchy. The human approach was chaotic, unpredictable, and frighteningly effective. As the market hub quieted, Jax knew the galaxy's perception of humans was changing. They would start whispering, questioning, and watching. And that was fine. Humans didn't need approval. They thrived on surprises. He leaned back in the pilot's seat, staring at the stars streaming past the windows. His tiny pod had not only survived but shined in a place designed to overwhelm and intimidate. It was a testament to human creativity, curiosity, and fearlessness. Somewhere across the galaxy, other species would be calculating, trying to understand how a human with a 50-cent spaceship could outperform their multi-million credit vessels, and they would never fully understand. Because humans weren't predictable. They weren't easily calculated. They improvised, adapted, and invented solutions that no algorithm could predict. Jax looked at his pod, humming softly in the docking bay. Tiny, underestimated, cheap. It had become a symbol that the galaxy would remember. Tomorrow, humans might be mocked again. But today, in the Nebula Market, the galaxy had seen what humans were capable of. And it would never be the same. Jax climbed out, laughing quietly as the aliens watched him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had done more than just finish a course. He had flipped the galaxy's assumptions upside down. The Nebula Market had quieted after the day's chaos. Alien ships drifted in orbit, some repairing minor collisions, others quietly analyzing what had just happened. Yet the ripple of curiosity and disbelief remained. Humans had arrived in the most humble way possible and left a mark the galaxy would not forget. Jax leaned against the tiny pod, polishing its metallic hull. It gleamed softly under the market's artificial lights. Despite its size, despite its cheap price, it had done the impossible, outperformed vessels far superior in every technical aspect. A group of aliens approached him, their usual arrogance tempered by cautious respect. The tall, translucent one who had spoken before nodded slightly. "Human," it said, voice still tinged with disbelief. "Your actions have caused reconsideration. Your species' capabilities are unexpected." Jax grinned. "That's kind of the point. You rely on instinct and creativity rather than sheer power or cost," the alien continued. "It is unsettling. Dangerous! Dangerous!" Jax chuckled. "We call it thinking outside the box." The alien paused, studying him. "Perhaps humans are different than we assumed." And that was the truth. For centuries, humans had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed by advanced civilizations. Small, fragile, slow. They were the galactic underdogs, but that very underestimation had become their greatest strength. Jax climbed back into the pod. He had a feeling the galaxy would be watching closely now, curious about what humans could do next. And that curiosity played perfectly into his hands. The challenge at the Nebula Market was over, but the human story was just beginning. Word of his tiny pod had already spread across forums, communications channels, and trade networks. Aliens debated endlessly. How could a species with so little resources accomplish so much? Jax activated the pod's communication systems and uploaded a demo of his run through the Nebula Rift. It was unedited, raw, and clearly a human effort. Within minutes, reactions poured in from all corners of the galaxy. Some dismissed it as luck or a glitch in the pod's systems. Others analyzed every detail, running simulations and scratching their heads. Every expert admitted the same thing. A human pilot had done what their top ships could not. He leaned back in the seat, watching the feed. Aliens everywhere were quietly recalculating. Humans, they realized, could not be ignored. "Not bad for 50 cents, Jax muttered to himself, smiling. But the pod had more to show. Its capabilities weren't just in speed or navigation. It could adapt to unexpected situations, communicate with older satellites, and even reroute energy to systems that needed it most, all automatically. It was clever, intuitive, and unpredictable. In the next hour, Jax performed more demonstrations. He guided the pod through crowded traffic lanes, through abandoned stations, and even around rogue satellites that had drifted too close to the market. Every maneuver impressed observers. Alien pilots tried to mimic him, but their ships lacked the human touch, the instinct, the improvisation, the creativity. By the end of the day, Jax had earned a following, not just among humans, though they cheered quietly, but across alien species as well. Engineers whispered about the possibilities. Traders speculated about human potential. Pilots eyed him warily, realizing that underestimating a human could be a mistake. The translucent alien approached again, this time with a slight smile. "You have done more than win a challenge. You have proven humans adapt, innovate, and survive in ways we do not understand. Perhaps we have misjudged your species." Jack shrugged. "We're good at making miracles out of scraps. It's kind of what we do." Word traveled fast. Across the nebula, space stations, and communication channels, the story of the 50-cent pod spread like wildfire. Soon, humans everywhere were quietly smiling. The galaxy thought it could ignore them. It couldn't anymore. Jax decided to take a small detour. He flew toward a nearby cluster of derelict satellites, left abandoned by alien engineers who had long forgotten them. Using the pod's adaptive systems, he activated their old communication arrays. In minutes, he had connected dozens of satellites into a network, creating a temporary human observation grid across the sector. From a cheap, underestimated pod, Jax had created a tool far beyond what most civilizations considered possible. Alien engineers watching from afar were speechless. "This is not possible," muttered one. "How does a human think like this?" Jax laughed softly. "Humans didn't follow logic the same way aliens did. Humans experimented, adapted, and solved problems intuitively. Systems built for predictability struggled to keep up with unpredictability, and that was humanity's edge." As the day turned into night in the nebula market, Jax docked the pod and stepped out. He looked around at the crowd of aliens, traders, and engineers. Some were still whispering, some were openly amazed, and a few were quietly intimidated. He knew they would never forget this day. A tiny, cheap human spaceship had done what no one expected. It had forced the galaxy to notice humans! Jax took a deep breath, feeling the satisfaction of the day settle in. Humanity didn't need the biggest ship, the most advanced weapons, or the highest credits. What humans had, and what humans excelled at, was ingenuity, courage, and adaptability. And sometimes, all it took was 50 cents to remind the galaxy of that. The aliens who had doubted him now approached cautiously, offering congratulations, questions, and even subtle respect. Jax smiled. Humans didn't need enemies. Sometimes the best influence came from showing strength without aggression. In the quiet moments, he reflected on the journey. From his small room on a tiny planet to the crowded nebula market, all it took was curiosity, courage, and a willingness to experiment. The pod had been cheap, yes, but it had revealed something priceless, the power of human potential. By the time he prepared to leave, the nebula market buzzed with a new understanding. Humans were not weak. Humans were not naive. Humans were clever, adaptable, and unpredictable, and sometimes, just sometimes, they could turn a 50-cent spaceship into a legend. Jax waved to the aliens watching him, then activated the pod's thrusters. It lifted off smoothly, weaving past the stations, and disappeared into the vast expanse of stars. Behind him, the galaxy would remember this day. Not because of technology, not because of wealth, but because of human ingenuity. The lesson was clear: underestimate humans at your own peril. Jax smiled as he soared through the nebula, leaving tiny trails of light behind. Somewhere out there, the universe was changing its perception of humanity, one curious, daring, and clever human at a time. And in that moment, Jax understood something simple, yet profound. Humanity didn't need massive fleets, billions of credits, or perfect technology. All it needed was imagination, courage, and a willingness to try the impossible. The galaxy had finally learned what humans had always known. Humans were not just survivors. Humans were problem solvers, innovators, and unstoppable when underestimated. And somewhere far across the stars, another cheap, tiny human invention was waiting to quietly show the galaxy that, once again, humans could change everything. Jax leaned back in his pilot seat, sipping a small drink. The pod hummed softly around him. 50 cents! That was all it took to prove a simple, undeniable truth. Never underestimate a human. And with that, humanity's quiet legend continued to grow. One clever human, one small pod, and one daring adventure at a time.